Well, can you talk a little bit about two things? One, your role and the fact that you're the only Scrum Master, and what that means for your coordination with everyone. And then two, if there's any difference pre and post pandemic. So first question. Yes.
So there's definitely a difference pre and post pandemic. I did have, and I've had another Scrum Master, at least one with me, working for me for the past 3 years, I would say. I went through a couple different people. One was, snuck into HR. One of them left to pursue another higher opportunity in another company. And unfortunately, one was let go this last March because we did have layoffs. I think it's always best to work with a team, and I love having another set of eyes. But unfortunately, at this time, we've just scaled down our teams, due to the pandemic and revenue streams and all of that. So it has been a challenge being the one and only Scrum Master because, I do need to be involved with all the teams. I need to know what everybody's doing at all times, pretty much. I like to say I'm air traffic control. I'm making sure the teams are moving forward. If they need anything, I'm constantly kind of bugging people. I'd like to say is a good part of my day is just making sure the product owners get the teams what they need. They can move forward. There's no roadblocks, things like that. But then also the reason why it is working relatively well right now is simply because we have sort of a senior group of devs that we've kept with us. Again, we went through layoffs like any company did through the pandemic, but it's a senior group of developers who can really push themselves forward if they do need anything. And we have practices we've put in place that we've been using for the past 5 years that have really iterated and transitioned into really firm processes that everybody is following. So that has really helped us. And we've come a long way ever since I've been a Scrum Master to really develop Agile in a really good form. So that's working well for us. And it makes my job a lot easier for sure.
Would you say that the entire company is an Agile company and that everyone tries to participate in the methodology or at least in the philosophy?
I would say, we do have, yes and no. I don't think it's fully 100% Agile. I don't know if any company will get there. And obviously, I'd like to make inroads with the other departments.
Sure.
But we do, I have made, some inroads here and there. And we all have the company coming together once a month for what we call a company sprint review. So that's, I think, the best and most recent piece that we've implemented. We started doing it in February and we had, live sessions. And then obviously we shifted to remote. So we've had these remote sessions, which has actually worked out really well. And they've helped create a touch point in, these times when we're all working from home, and it's a really nice place for everybody to come together. But it's a true sprint review. It's what each department is doing. So we're all in the loop. We're keeping that transparency and keeping that process going. I say from that perspective, but obviously there's other Agile practices I'd love to apply to the other teams. It's just a matter of time and resources and, making it work for the other departments.
Would you say that Agile has helped, hurt, or is just another element as y'all work remotely together? Are there things in the Agile approach that you're grateful for as a result of having to work even more distributed?
Yeah, I think the Agile methodology is, I'm a Scrum Master, so I'm a firm believer in it. And I really want to apply it as, in its truest form. But I do think we've had some unique challenges as a company, and that we went through an acquisition during the pandemic, and we acquired an entire other company with an entire different set of viewpoints on things.
There's a lot of change during the pandemic.
It's a lot. Yeah, it was quite the surprise. I think to most people that we went forward with that. And then, even after the acquisition, we had a round of layoffs. So it's been a lot moving forward, but merging the two teams, I think, distributed and working remotely has been a little bit more difficult than I would have anticipated. They have definitely, like I said, different viewpoints and different ways of doing things, and weren't necessarily on the same page as us. So it's taken some time to get to a place where we are on the same page. And honestly, I think it's still a work in progress. all that change, I think probably I would not recommend at the same time. I think it was extremely stressful on all. And on top of it, we completely shifted our roadmap and are developing an entirely new product, which is, to say the least, a challenge in itself when you have teams who've been working together for years, let alone another set of teams that from an entirely different company doing entirely different things. So I think that's one of our biggest challenges. There's just too much change in one period of time. And right now, I don't have a good solution for that. And as a Scrum Master, that doesn't make me feel very good about, my role or trying to help. So I'm just trying to help the teams as much as they can and moving forward as much as they can, but they still feel that pressure. And, it's pretty complicated.
Oh, I'll say, even though this sounds very challenging, it's this conversation's benefit because we can learn from the things that you're going through.
It's a big warning.
So let's say that, let's focus in. You've got an entirely new team that was brought together with existing teammates during the pandemic, which means onboarding is a little bit different. Can you talk about anything that you think was helpful because you knew this was all happening during, shelter in place times? Or if you can't think of a lot of those examples, what are the things like this was a struggle and I really wish we could have figured out a better way to do X? Either direction.
Yeah, I wish we had figured out a better way to, I think we needed, honestly, more training. We think we needed more formal training. I sort of went through a brief overview with some of the new team members about, hey, here's what we do. You guys will really, live it and breathe it as you get into the meetings and stuff, but there was still a lot of disconnect. So I think we needed more time to sit down and really explain our processes, and I'll take that as my fault.
No. This is just good for anyone that's onboarding during this. For example, like Atlassian, we continue to hire, and people have come to Atlassian that have no idea what the inside of any of our offices are like or what the culture of co-located space looks like. And onboarding is a big, big topic. So actually, if you could talk a little bit more, what do you mean by formal training in terms of, you're not just talking about skills, I take it, it's about
hey, this is our processes. This is what we do. And for a long period of time, I don't understand. We did things differently here. I don't understand why you guys are doing them differently. Or, there was a conversation about the processes and trying to merge those, which quite frankly, it's still sort of being worked out. And I think we really need to just sit down and be like, hey, here's it step by step. Here's what we do with X. Here's what we do with Y. Here's what we do with Z. Instead of, we've had a lot of people on board, and it was a lot easier when people were in office and we could be like, come to this meeting with me and let me show you how we run it, or what outputs we get from this, or what's the point of this. And it's difficult to, I could send a bunch of documentation, which of course I did, but to really get people to get it, I think I needed to take more time with them to mold them and just be like, hey, there's reasons why we do this. We didn't just, do it for fun. So does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I think even outside of distributed teamwork, even co-located teams, I'll tell you, I have been with a few companies, all onboarding in person, and I wish that I had more process training everywhere at every company.
I think that's a big thing. Yeah, that's something that I definitely learned from this is more process training, more focus on why we do X, why we do Z. So that I think is a big thing that we can take away going forward as if we ever onboard again, which hopefully we will.
And what would that look like if you were to start implementing that, let's say tomorrow? Is it like a walkthrough tutorial of processes? Is it like shadowing of one person doing something and the other newbie saying oh, I'll just watch you while you go through a process? That's like a real life example.
I think it's probably a combination of both. I will say that I did have a very successful with my last Scrum Master. I had a really successful onboarding with her. She's really quick to pick up stuff, but I would set aside every other day, we'd meet for a couple hours and be like, okay, so this is what I do, X, Y, and Z here, or this is what this meeting is about. This is the responsibility of these devs. This is the responsibility of these product owners. But then, for the rest of the day, we'd sit in meetings together, and she would Slack me messages during the meeting or questions, and I would be able to answer and be like, hey, this is why we're doing this. So that was a really useful exercise, and she got trained up really quickly. But now getting people on board, and especially it's hard when, I'm in software engineering and we have people in product who they're not, even though we're separate departments, we have to work together constantly. There wasn't sort of that back and forth that I think we needed at the onboarding. So now we're running into some clashes.
Gotcha. What are some feedback loops or cues of like, hey, here are some things that we can, that aren't working. And this could be about onboarding or other things, but like, how do you know that you want to make changes? How do you know that there's growth or space for improvement?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that has come out of it, I will, going back to the basic Agile process, retros. Retrospectives have been extremely insightful. I feel like I've hammered on the developers. I'm like, hey, you guys need to tell me what's working, what's not working. And they're because we work together for so long, they're not shy. They're definitely forthcoming and being like, this is not working. And unfortunately, some of those things, there's only so much we can do, but other than just tell people, hey, people are confused, maybe we need to think about this. But yeah, I think the retrospective has been a help. Little check-ins here and there. I think the retros honestly formalize the process. And that way, like, I'm literally taking down notes of what they're saying, and then I'm sending it off to the respective teams to be like, here is what your developer's saying. You really need to try and work through this kind of thing. So I think that's been the biggest sort of key indicator of the feedback we've gotten so far.
Awesome. And then as you get this feedback, like, I know what you're doing as an individual, which by the way, sounds like a job entirely on its own in addition to being a Scrum Master. But is everyone else just like you and in trying to learn from the past and improve in the future and sending notes to each other? Or is there like a formal group internally that's trying to say like, hey, these are different times. We have to adjust, and we're tasked on just bettering what we're doing to onboard people and bettering what we're doing as we're all distributed. Like, who's responsible for all of the growth and changes?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think there is. Like, this is so great that you guys are doing this exercise and asking, how can you better your improvements? I don't think there's anybody who's doing that in my company, to be quite honest.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, I think that would be great if we had, and that's actually a good idea, to have a committee to be like, what are some of the areas? I've actually, some of the teams that I've worked with other departments, like, marketing, I would have a retrospective with them like once a quarter. They're like, all right, well, once a month, maybe it's a little too much. Honestly, I didn't think it was too much, but I got a little pushback there. But
sure.
I think, but we came out of those meetings with a lot of really good sort of suggestions. So I think having somebody doing those, formal, what we can improve sort of meetings would be a good point. Unfortunately, right now, there's just so much work and so little time. Nobody's focusing, I don't think, on the improvements, unfortunately.
So do you think there are other people just like yourself who are documenting things of like, hey, my onboarding experience as a newbie was interesting. Here's some areas that I liked, and here are some things that could improve. And they just like do a little memo and share it out with people? Or would you say that you are the main person doing retros and things like that?
Yeah, I'm probably the main one. And I think I do have somebody in HR who used to be a Scrum Master, which is really helpful. And she's always her own processes, which is good. But she has been shifted from HR now to sales because, like, again, there's been so many changes in my company internally as well. That's a whole nother layer on top of this sort of messy cake. So, so I do think actually the sales team, they've got some sort of new blood in there, and they are working through a lot of different processes. So I think that department is actually flourishing in that regard, and that this person who worked in HR is now in sales, and she's helping to sort of better this process. So I think there are things that are taking it department-wide, but I don't think there's anybody sort of joining all those process improvements from a company perspective.
Gotcha. Let's switch gears a little bit. So we've covered a lot on onboarding and learning and when teams are moving around, what happens and responsibility of change. But these are all really like high level topics. Let's get into specifics on what's an example of something that you're like, you know what? As a distributed team, we have learned to do X well. And that could be something that y'all have been doing for a long time, or something that you just started because of the pandemic and or because, I don't know, of the acquisition. Like, what are some specific examples that you would recommend other teams potentially try?
Yeah, actually, I think what has been really great, since we've always had a distributed team, when we all went to work remotely, one of the key things that our distributed team members who are already in place said to us, they're like, wow, the communication is so much better now that we're all, forced to use Slack, forced to use email. You know what I'm saying? And honestly, Slack has been our number one communicator. I'm talking with multiple people at all times. And we have a lot of different chat channels set up, but they said the communication has been much clearer because, everybody needs to know it. We're to the point of over communicating, which is really great. I think I think the place that you need to be in, where everybody's sort of in the loop on that kind of thing. The only problem I foresee that we've gotten into is that sometimes departments will take it upon themselves to have their own meetings, but it affects the other teams. They don't tell people those things. So honestly, I'm trying to sort of curtail that by literally being in all the team meetings and trying to be like, hey guys, if you're having a meeting, if you need somebody to take notes, I'm there. But really, I'm there to make sure that there's nothing else that nobody else needs to know, because that can be lost as well if you don't have somebody who's going to be like, all right, oh, you know what? I'll take this and I'll tell so and so.
Right. What is it about the fact that everyone is remote that the communication is either over communicated or more complete? Like, is it the reliance on documentation? Is it inclusion of more people on threads? What do you think it is?
I think most of the communication has honestly moved to Slack. So we still have our regular team meetings. We still do it. We have a whitelisted Zoom, which is called Ring Central, that we use. So we've maintained those, and we've always had sort of a GoToMeeting aspect of those meetings that we use for the remote people. But now, obviously, everybody's on the remote meeting. It's not just the people who aren't in office. So I think because everything has a lot of it has moved to Slack and we're over communicating in that regard, I think that has helped a lot. That tool specifically has really been great.
Gotcha. Cool. What other examples could you point to that are different now, or that you think are different from other teams that are co-located? And it could be examples that you're like, I don't know if this is really awesome, but it's a distinction from teams that are co-located.
I think one thing, and that even before we went fully remote, I think one thing that has been extremely useful is you need a note taker in every single meeting. So we use Confluence like crazy. We don't go into a meeting unless it has an agenda. Like, you have to schedule a meeting, you have to include an agenda in the meeting link. You need to have a page in Confluence set up with that agenda and talking points. And then somebody has to take notes of what everybody's saying. And then somebody has to write down action items after that and then send out the notes following it. Like, that simple process, which sounds like common sense, I don't think everybody's doing it. And I
agree.
Yeah, it saved our bus so many times. It's unbelievable. So I've learned to type really quickly.
I really like that you have a designated note taker too, because sometimes the designated note taker is also the facilitator, and sometimes it's a separate person, but it's like a whole job to participate and note take, or participate and facilitate. Like,
oh no, it really is. Yeah, that's why usually, fortunately, the product owners will run the team meetings, and I'll just be taking notes, and then I'll make action items and things like that in the background. So
awesome. Would you say you're doing that more nowadays than, say, a year ago, or about the same?
Probably about the same. I'm just doing it more simply because I used to have another Scrum Master who would split meetings with me, but now it's me. So yeah, a little bit more.
Gotcha. Another undercover theme I'm hearing is maybe more of you would be helpful.
Yeah. I have to say though, like, I thought this was going to be, and for the first couple of months, it was pretty hectic because there was only one of me. But I would say that because I'm working from home and I'm able to focus in, and there's nothing else going on, quite frankly, it hasn't been a complete overload. So it's been all right. We've figured out ways to make it work.
Interesting. Actually, talk more about that. And it could be about your own personal experience or if you've heard from coworkers, but the whole working from home idea, what's changed in terms of your collaboration with everyone or other people's collaboration with each other as a result of home life being in the mix as well?
Yeah, actually, naturally working with the software developers, like even when they were in office, they would use Slack, even if they're sitting right next to each other. So
Yeah.
we were really accustomed to using Slack and talking to each other all the time. I mean, now we just sort of do it even more so for like chit chat, good mornings, stuff like that, whereas you can't see people in office. So I think it's been used in that regard. I think it's been really helpful. There's a lot more, and I think it formalizes the collaboration too, because, if I ask, I'll ask Steve a question, and then I can't remember, did I ask him that question yesterday? I'll just go to my Slack records, and that has made it
Right.
pretty useful for me. And honestly, because I'm not in office, I'm not as distracted by some of that chit chat. Like somebody could Slack me, but I could simply ignore it. It's a little bit easier to sort of get away from some of those distractions. So personally, I think I'm able to focus in a little bit more and get more stuff done while I'm working remotely. Whereas in the office, I think, meetings could drag on or somebody could pull you, if you're trying to get coffee, somebody could talk to you kind of thing. And you don't have sort of those distraction levels in that regard.
I actually really love that. I hear most often right now, at least internally, that someone grabs you really quick, or you're seeing some coffee and you get distracted as things that people miss in terms of like culture and camaraderie. But on the flip side, you're really locked in. If you are in a meeting, you're in a meeting. If you're doing deep work, you're doing deep work. If you're in a conversation with 5 people on Slack, you're in those conversations, but there's not anyone else driving by. And,
right.
I think that's interesting. Yeah, that's a really
and that definitely helps. I will say though that there obviously is a negative. I always thought that I would love to work from home like all the time. And while it does have its benefits, I found that I was shockingly missed the office more than I thought I would. It's definitely a different way of working. I'm much more used to it than I used to be when it first started. I think I was a little bit more sad back then, but it's gotten better as time has gone on.
Why do you think that is? What has improved?
I think I just got more used to it. I actually talked to one of my friends. She works for a data analytics company, and she's been fully remote for like a couple of years. And she said, the first year was really a struggle for her. She's like, I thought I couldn't do it, but you just get used to it. I think it's just a matter of time.
Really good point. I, again, have heard a lot of people talking about missing culture or not, or missing being able to focus at home and not now that there are more people at home, but just the idea of having to adjust and that we should be, gracious with ourselves, that it takes time to adjust to.
It does. Yeah. And I think it was much more of a culture shock for the rest of our company rather than even the development department, because like I said, we've been working with distributed team members and we were kind of set up. Like I said, we've always been using Slack, but when we first, decided to pull the company fully remote, I think that was like the second or third week in March, that we had an all company meeting, and our CEO asked me to go over how the development team worked remotely. And so I went over all the kind of the stuff that we do using Slack, using Confluence. Obviously it's easier for us because we have Jira and we can track progress of people. So they had to sort of think of their own ways to track progress company-wide that, it's not so formalized, but also, you still want to know what people are doing. You want to make sure they're not baking cookies in the middle of the day. So be careful there.
Right. I've already gone over time. Okay, let me just ask you a bonus free-for-all then.
Sure.
As you know, Atlassian is trying to learn as much as possible. Customers are listening to this, either shaking their heads or nodding their heads vigorously saying, yeah, I resonate with that, or like, oh yeah, I want to stay away from that. Is there anything, knowing the audience that may consume this, that you want to say, hey, here's a PSA, or hey, if I could learn one thing or redo it again, it would be this. And again, we've talked about a number of things, so you don't have to reiterate any of those things, but what else that we haven't talked about would you like to share?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just have to be cognizant of the other people that you're working with. And I think honestly, it's a matter of like working mindfully. So it's just
Mm,
noticing when people are really stressed or if they're busy and they're in meetings. When are some of the times to, can I reach out to them now or should I do it later? And sort of judging your actions because you want to make sure that I think morale is a very important part of teamwork, obviously. And I really want to keep the morale of the software team going, especially right now. It's really difficult times. So you just have to sort of be mindful of how they're feeling. And I've actually upped my interactions on Slack with the team members, every once in a while interject to give them a laugh or something like that. And I do feel that that's part of my job as a scrum master is to, make sure they're doing all right. So yeah, it does take time to sort of get used to working remotely and distributedly. And, we're gonna be doing this for the foreseeable future. So I think working mindfully is kind of is a good way to think about it.
I love that so much, Lindsay. You've been talking about process and documentation and tools to use and things like that. But at the end of the day, your final thought for us is about morale. It's about emotions. It's about working mindfully. I just, that is such a thing to keep heart, not just with this topic that we're talking about now, but just like in general.
Yeah, it really, and that's something that I'm pretty straight laced in work, and that the developers, like if I tell them to do something, they'll respond with an emote of a knife because they think it's funny that I'm gonna like yell at them. But I've sort of softened since the remote working, and like I said, I'll be a little bit more playful because I think we all need that right now, and that keeps that human connection, even as minor as it is, going.
Oh, what a perfect ending to this conversation. Lindsay, thank you so much for chatting. Thank you so much for letting me record you and
Yeah, absolutely.
for sharing not just with me and Atlassian, but for basically anyone that comes to Atlassian community.
Yeah, and if you need anything else, Christine, feel free to reach out. If you have another call in the future, I'll make sure I'm camera ready. I have actually a computer upstairs I should have run to.
No. It's all good. Just for listeners or those that are consuming this, if anyone wants to connect directly with you, what's the best way to do that? Through Atlassian community, or is there another place?
Community's good, but probably LinkedIn is probably your easiest go-to. That one I check a little bit more often.
Gotcha.
But yeah, definitely. We have our own actually Atlassian community in Youngstown, so we're small but mighty. But yeah, we do virtual events, so it's a welcome to anybody. Doesn't matter where.
Awesome.